On today's show, just as John Wick once said, Camille, yeah, I guess the Bucks are back. It certainly appears that way as the numbers starting to move in the right direction. And what do you know? It appears like some of the national media is starting to come around on this Bucks team. So we'll get into that discourse. The latest on Khris Middleton as well. He will be out once again, but we do think we know when Khris will make his return. So we'll get into all of that coming up on the latest Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined by Camille Davis. You can hear me on the Bucks Radio Network. You can hear Camille Davis everywhere, basically. The Technical Foul Podcast, this show each and every day. It seems like any football show that's created, you can find Camille on. So just wherever you get your podcast, there's Camille Davis. We thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every day. Free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us on YouTube as well, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Today's Locked On Bucks brought to you by Grammarly. Make a bigger impact at work with Grammarly. Sign up and download for free at grammarly.com/podcast. Camille, we'll get to the stories that have started to come out now about this Bucks team. And I suppose we should give credit to Kevin O'Connor for breaking the seal and being the first of the national media that says, you know what? Maybe we should acknowledge that this team has actually looked pretty good of late. So we'll break that down in just a bit here. But piggybacking off the recap that you and Frank had from that Hornets game, look, this defense continues to be very, very impressive. And I'm gonna preface with this because we saw it after the Sixers game when we pointed out, it's third time in 6 games Bucks have held the opponents under 100 points. Mm-hmm. Saw a lot of pushback of, so what? It was the Sixers without Joel Embiid. One of those games was against the Hornets. Now another game against the Hornets as well. But I think you and I talked about this. I don't care. I don't care who's on the floor, who isn't on the floor. The way offense is in the league these days and scoring, holding an opponent under 100 points means something. And that Philadelphia 76ers team, even if there's no Joel Embiid, they had Tyrese Maxey. They had Tobias Harris. They've been scoring a lot of points without Joel Embiid. It's a Hornets team you and I talked about that's been playing a lot better defensively, maybe not so much offensively. But, this is what we were asking for months when the season started of defense has to look better. You got to start to make stops. You got to beat these teams you're supposed to beat. And we need to see the defense look good against bad offenses. Well, now they're doing that. So you can't penalize the Bucks for doing it now and penalize them before for not doing it.
Absolutely. Like, you don't see Celtics fans over here talking about like, oh, we're on this win streak, but it's come against nobody. Like, they rattled off wins on this current win streak against the Grizzlies, the Hawks, the Wizards, the Heat, the Nets twice, the Bulls, the Knicks, and the 76ers. So, like, you're not seeing them being like, well, I guess, hey, look at who we're playing against. It doesn't matter. Like, no, it matters. And if you consider yourself to be one of the contending teams and you're playing against quote unquote weaker competition, then like you should see the results of that. You should see your team playing really well. And that's something that earlier in the season that we were like, hey, like we played Detroit twice. And like, these games were a little close. Like, we didn't expect them to be this close, but here we are. We got the win out of it. And you see what they do against the Hornets, where it's a big blowout. Like, that's been a constant theme so far this season for this Bucks team, even under Griff in that first game, where I think that was their only game prior where they held an opponent under 100 points was the first game against the Hornets. So, like, they're doing what we have asked and wanted to see them doing. We know that they can get up when it comes to playing against good competition. We've seen it. But it's been against the games where it's like, hey, this should be a take care of business game. This should be a game you win handily. We haven't had many like blowout games like a few years ago under Bud, where it's like the Bucks are up big and now it's the fourth quarter victory cigar where it's the whole bench coming in and getting to see the opportunity happen. It's like, I forgot what this feels like. This is really cool to see. But regardless of that, like, the defense has been good even against better competition. That's the first thing that we've been pointing to with the coaching change. Like, we were saying like, hey, the wins aren't here yet, but if you look at how they're playing, you can see the defense is improving. And coming out of the break, it seems like they're coming out with a renewed focus. I heard Giannis talking about, hey, forget the playoffs, forget the championships, focus on right now in this moment. Like, let's have some fun and do what we need to be doing. And you see them out here playing really well, like against the Timberwolves. You see Carlton Towns and you see Anthony Edwards have great games. Like, if you look at the stat sheet alone with the points scored, but it took Anthony Edwards like 22 shots to get to 23 points or whatever it was. So it's making it difficult for the superstars. They had the third quarter where they held the Timberwolves to 13 points. Like, that's impressive defense happening here. Like, that's not any like suspect competition right there. That's the number one team in the West, looking at the standings right there. A great defensive team as well. We saw how they blew the Bucks out prior to the rematch in Minnesota. So we know what the Timberwolves can do. And then you have the Philly game, which again, I know there was no Embiid, but yet and still, this Bucks defense was able to hold that 76ers team to 16 points in the fourth quarter. And 11 of those points were garbage time. So really, 5 points when the game was really in the balance. The defense really turned it up. And then you see against the Hornets, holding them to 26 points and a half. I don't care how bad the team is. 26 points and a half is nuts. That's crazy. Like, that's unbelievable. And just seeing how the team has been able to execute this with largely the same personnel as they had earlier in the season is what's most impressive to me, because I mentioned it before, but I was having like conversations and thoughts like, maybe they just don't have the personnel to play good defense. Like, maybe it's too much of a loss trading out your Drew Holiday, your Javon Carters, your Wes Matthews, and substituting them with your Damian Lillard, your Malik Beasleys, and so on and so forth. But seeing them under Doc now, it's like, no, they can play defense. And it looks like they believe they can play defense. And they really they bought into that now as well.
Damian Lillard, too. Look, we're not suggesting that Damian Lillard has become an all defensive player, but out of the All-Star break, Damian Lillard's been very active and has looked much more re-energized on the defensive end as well. That his impact there has been notable. And look, that's going to be what teams are going to try to exploit in the postseason. That all this is working great now. We understand when you get to the playoffs, that's where teams are going to look, is the backcourt, and say, okay, we know Damian Lillard is going to be matched up on, in all likelihood, the worst offensive player for our team. So how do we get into those two-man actions and get Damian Lillard switched onto the matchup that we want, or Malik Beasley? So I would assume Doc Rivers and Rex Kalamian, that's a lot of what they're working on now that we're not going to see, is how do we counteract that? And what is our counterpunch to that when that happens? But in the meantime, you also can't complain about Damian Lillard's defense, because he's been very good in these 3 games out of the All-Star break. And again, to keep going back to the same refrain of how has this happened, it really comes down to the little things that the Bucks have been doing since Doc Rivers arrived, but really since the coaching change, when you look at everything they stopped doing and started instituting things. And I think that's the biggest thing that stands out. I'm not saying they haven't changed anything, but it's been more of not doing things versus installing new things. And Doc has talked about that quite a bit, that, I don't want to bombard the guys, and we're in the middle of the season, and it's kind of hard to just, here's our playbook, here's what we're going to run. He talked about it again before the Hornets game and said, a lot of their plays are good, and I like what they're doing here. So it's just going in there and cleaning that up and saying, okay, why don't we not do this? And I think that's the biggest thing, is not do this. Let's not crash on the offensive boards. Let's rebound the ball defensively. Let's limit transition. They're not giving up those transition opportunities. That is what stands out the most. That and rebounding. When you look at how the Bucks have been in transition, the numbers have floated around. I saw Frank pointed them out after the game as well, in the Bucks ranking in the top 5 since the coaching change. I believe they're 6th, according to Cleaning the Glass, defensively since Doc Rivers took over. Offense is still, I think at last check, it was around 17 or 18. But half-court offense has been pretty good. It's close to the top 10. And that's kind of what you would hang your hat on. And the encouraging part is, look, offense it's going to take time, because you need Khris Middleton and all the pieces back. But in the meantime, this gives us reason for optimism when you see it's working in the half court with Damian Lillard and Giannis, because that's what we're going to need in the playoffs. But that transition piece, they've really drastically reduced the frequency that
Yeah.
opponents are getting into transition. They were 30th in the league up until January 23rd. So opponents were getting the most transition opportunities of any team against the Bucks than any other team. And now in these games played since Doc Rivers took over, the Bucks are 7th. So they've gone from 30th to 7th in the frequency opponents are getting in transition. And not to, lose people with all the cleaning the glass references here, but the points plus. In other words, what it's looking at is you're going to score more in transition.
Mhm.
That's the nature of the beast. But how many more are you going to give up? And the Bucks have been third best there. The points plus in transition, just 1.1 additional points per 100 possessions that the Bucks are giving up in transition. In fairness, they were around the middle of the pack before this coaching change. They were just giving up a ton of opportunities, but they're third best in what they're doing. So they're in the top 10 in amount of times opponents are getting in transition and third best in preventing them from scoring in transition.
And one other aspect of that I've really enjoyed seeing since the coaching change and with Doc coming in is just the communication level with this team on defense. Like that's something that really stood out to me when he talked about his very first practice of coaching this team, where he asked them like, "Hey, do you think you're a low, medium, or high communication team?" And the team responded like, "We're probably a low communication team." And when you're watching, especially out of the break so far, you see them so actively talking with each other on defense. You see them pointing out matchups. You see them, even if needed, pushing guys into position where they need to be. Like they just seem like they're so much more connected than what they were before. And Doc mentioned the fact that a lot of times when guys aren't talking, it's in part because they're unsure of what should be happening at the moment. Like there has been a lot more clarity about the roles that guys should be playing, their responsibilities, and what's expected of them. And now you see them communicating with each other so much more often because it seems like everybody understands the roles and responsibilities so much better now, which has of course led to better results on the defensive end. And again, I'm not saying that to be like, hey, with Griff, everything was trash, but like we just have to look at what the situation was, right? Like Griff came in saying like, I'm not going to change too much, and then proceeded to change a lot defensively. And apparently, like in the Kevin O'Connell article that you mentioned, where we're talking about national media later, but he even mentioned himself, like communication was, guys did not understand what they were supposed to be doing or what their roles are. And that's like basic, like we need to know what we're doing on the court. We can't just rely on, I think you should be here, or I feel like it's going to be this way. Like defense is about being connected on that string together. And you're seeing that effort from these guys a lot more. Like Beasley was tasked with having the hardest defensive assignment from Jump Street. And he relished in it. Like he did want to take that challenge. And I enjoy now seeing him after they get a stop or he makes the right play. He's clapping it up. Like he's really getting into it. And that's not uncommon. That's what you've seen from him consistently. But now you're seeing other guys on the bench with them. You're seeing Pat Bev. Like the energy is just different. The communication has been better. And has led to a lot of the things that you pointed out with transition defense being better with the half. Like just everything is looking a lot cleaner and more organized for this team at this point.
Yeah, and communication that we've mentioned a number of times now, that has been huge for the team. A lot of the differences have been stemming from communication, and we will get into that when we talk about that article that Kevin O'Connor put out. But I do want to take a look at Khris Middleton, the latest injury report for that game tomorrow, round 2 or round 4 in this matter against the Charlotte Hornets is out there. Khris Middleton is out. So we'll examine the latest on Khris and when we can expect to see him, because I think Doc Rivers may have told us without actually telling us in that game yesterday against the Hornets. We'll get into that discussion coming up after the break on Locked On Bucks. Our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Basketball host Josh Lloyd to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week, all season long. Whether you're preparing for a daily draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you players that are guaranteed to fit your roster. Camille, I am going to go with Benedict Mathurin. Not sure about your thoughts on that one, but He has been a scoring machine off the bench. And of course, no Buddy Hield. The Pacers won again in their game tonight. So Benedict Mathurin, to me, is the guy that stands out the most in this list from Josh Lloyd.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I mean, the opportunity that he's had since the trade deadline, more minutes, more opportunities, like fantasy, absolutely. You want a guy who has opportunities to get to it. So I like that pick.
Yeah, Benedict Mathurin, career best in terms of the numbers that he's putting up. More opportunities now with no Buddy Hield there. So Benedict Mathurin, the choice from the two of us. Josh Lloyd from Locked On Fantasy Basketball. He's going to help you win your fantasy championship. And eBay Motors knows the championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. Same with your vehicle. If you have any needs, eBay Motors is the place to go because over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. 122 million parts eBay Motors has. You can make sure your ride or die stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof racks, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay's guaranteed fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay's guaranteed fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. And Locked On has launched the first ever national sports streaming channel. It's also now on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today, 24/7 coverage of the top stories of the day, local or national. Find Locked On Sports Today now available in the free Fire TV channels app. No Khris Middleton in this game against the Charlotte Hornets, Camille. At this point, you've grown used to playing without Khris Middleton, unfortunately, for the Bucks. But Doc Rivers did say yesterday, he was asked before the game about Khris and if there was an update there, said no, and just said a continuation of what we've heard a lot of, he's close. And Doc added, I don't know what close means, but I know he's close. I don't know if it means it's going to be a game or two. He said the same thing after Philly. I don't know if that means it's going to be our next game, but it's close and he feels good. But he did say, I don't know if he's going to make the road trip after the game when he was asked for some more context. I don't know if he's going to make the road trip. If he doesn't, it's just because he's staying here to get more rehab, and kind of hinted at it's because he'll stay here for rehab so he can go when we return. Adrian Wojnarowski had the report earlier today on Wednesday too, that Khris was about a week away. So to me, it really feels like, and I felt this way for about a week now, Monday against the Clippers is, to me, what seems like when we're going to see Khris Middleton make his return.
Yeah, it feels like it's close. Like it just feels real close. Like even when they came back from the All-Star break and they were practicing and Doc's asked about it, and he's like, well, like Khris didn't go through practice. He's here shooting around and everything. And if it was the playoffs, he could probably play. Like he'd probably play through it at this point if it was the playoffs, but it's February. It is not the playoffs. There is no point, rhyme, or reason for us to rush it with him. Like his health and long-term goal setting is more important than anything else. So like we're not going to rush him back into it, which I love. I love that. Like I know that there's a subset of people who continuously point to the fact that Khris is quote unquote always injured and you got to let him go and so on and so forth. But again, this is an ankle injury that someone put their foot underneath him when he's trying to shoot a jumper. Like, I don't know how you avoid that. But the good news is that he is going to be seemingly coming back as the Bucks prepare for this stretch run. And even if it's not that Monday game against the Clippers at home, hopefully he's ready to go for that road trip to the West Coast there, because this schedule, after you get past Charlotte and Chicago on the back-to-back, coming home to have the Clippers at home before you head out west to play the Warriors, the Lakers, the Clippers again, the Kings, and then you come back home and you have the 76ers. Like that's a slate. And we've known that this half of the season was going to be some games where you're like, man, that's a difficult stretch there. So if they can get Khris back at least in time for that West Coast trip that starts on Wednesday of next week, like I think they'll be that's good for them. And I hope, I'm looking forward to seeing how he's incorporated back into the team as well. At this point, while they're getting more comfortable with what Doc wants to run, the terminology, the system, who's having the ball in their hands more, so on and so forth. But very excited about it and happy to hear that it seems as if Khris will be back in the lineup sooner rather than later.
And by the way, I'm sure our Locked On audience are loyal listeners to the Bucks Radio Network, but that game Monday against the Clippers is another WMLW game. Friday against the Bulls, and then
I love it.
Monday as well. And I think the Friday after that too in Los Angeles against the Lakers. It seems like all of March is a WMLW game for the Bucks. But you pointed to that schedule. At this moment, I believe there's only one opponent on the schedule in March that is outside of the playoff picture right now. So outside of either the top 6 or the play-in tournament, and that's the Brooklyn Nets. It is brutal that the Bucks have, and really you would look at that Bulls game, you'd look at the Nets game, and you look at the Hawks game at the very end of the month as these are probably our easiest games. I hesitate to even go that far and use that verbiage, but these are the games you're going to circle and say, we need to win these. The Sixers game too is, speaking of Adrian Wojnarowski, there was the report on Joel Embiid that the Sixers are hopeful he can be back on the floor in late March. So that all but rules Joel Embiid out for that matchup on March 14th with that verbiage. So, we said before this week, these games were important because of the schedule that you had. Maybe not so much winning by 38 points and winning via blowout, but you needed to win these games because of that schedule. And from here on out, you have to do the opposite of what you've done for most of this season. And that's not play to the level of your competition with those teams. That you got to beat those teams that you're expected to win against because of that West Coast trip, where you have the Warriors, who appears similar to the Bucks, maybe have found themselves now. The Lakers are fighting for their playoff seeding and postseason livelihood for that matter. The Clippers started to take a little bit of a step back, but they've still been one of the best teams in the league since December 1st. Kings are fighting to get out of that play-in tournament. You got the Suns again, who I expect to be healthy. You got the Celtics. So it's a brutal stretch. And oh, by the way, you got the Oklahoma City Thunder for the first time. So a very tough stretch. And that's the important part, is doing what the Bucks have done through these first 3 games. You had a nice win against the Timberwolves, and then you won 2 games you were expected to win.
Yeah, absolutely. And on top of that too, just the theatrical piece of it, right? A lot of these games are going to be on television. Like, these are a lot of national games coming up in the month of March for the Milwaukee Bucks between ESPN, ABC, TNT, NBA TV. The Bucks are going to have a lot of screen time come March. And this is coming off the heels of what we're going to discuss a bit in the next segment about how the national media has been viewing this team since Doc Rivers took over, the MVP race for Giannis and his place in it. Like, there are going to be a lot of opportunities for this team in front of a large audience to really show what they're about. And based on everything we've been hearing from the Bucks coming out of All-Star break, their focus, their dedication, I love having Pat Bev on this team, having the podcast and getting some of those insights as well from him as a player on this team and how they're feeling about it. But like, he's even saying like, we're ready to go. And he mentioned that, coming out of the break, they were going to have a practice with no contact. And he's like, no, we need to get out here. We got to get ready. And he made the suggestion they had a practice where they're getting into it because they understand what's in front of them right now. Like, you're not trying to overlook the month of March and say like, we're just thinking about, April, May, and June. We're just trying to get there. Like, you got to live in the moment a bit and enjoy the journey as you get there. But everything's pointing in a direction that it seems like the Bucks are really starting to find themselves. They're starting to understand team chemistry, how to play with one another, and this schedule that they have ahead of them, which we have been talking about, like, just warn people like, hey, they had the easiest schedule, up to the point where Grip is fired coming in with Doc. We knew it was going to be a tough schedule for them to overcome. So it's good preparation for the playoffs, in my opinion. You're going to get some really good competition, and the Bucks do seem to play better against better competition. So you want to see that continue, but you also want to see what we saw against Charlotte continue, where it's like, if it's a team where it's like you should beat this team, that they do so. Like you said, it might not be a 38-point blowout, but you want to see a big win from these Bucks.
Speaking of Pat Bev, there was one other piece of news. There's been a lot of news and events happening around this team recently that I do want to get into. And I suppose be remiss not to bring up what happened off the court last night too, and get your opinions on that. So we'll get into all of that. And that Kevin O'Connor piece, is the national media starting to come around on the Milwaukee Bucks? We will discuss coming up after the break. Time to talk to you now about Grammarly. No matter what kind of work you do, how you communicate is key. All the emails, reports, presentations, those are all equally important to the collaboration needed to get things done. That's where Grammarly can help. Grammarly is your AI writing partner to help you communicate more effectively and efficiently so you can make a bigger impact at work. 96% of Grammarly users report that Grammarly helps them craft more impactful writing, because Grammarly works across 500,000 apps and websites. By understanding your writing and context, Grammarly provides relevant, personalized suggestions. Their tone suggestions help you navigate even the most difficult work conversations. Save time with one click and go from editing drafts in hours to seconds. 93% of professionals using Grammarly Premium report that it helps them get more work done. That's what we're all looking for. Get more work done and do it quickly. That's where Grammarly comes in to give you the assist. Grammarly is the gold standard of responsible AI with 14 years of experience and just about every IT certification under the sun. Grammarly is a secure AI writing partner that helps your team take their point and move faster. Make a bigger impact at work with Grammarly. Sign up and download for free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's Grammarly, GRAMMARLY.com/podcast. Easier said, done. So before we get into the discussion on the national pieces, two other things to point out. Number one, you mentioned Pat Beverley's podcast. We also learned on Pat Beverley's podcast he is living in the former condo of Mike Budenholzer now. So
Right.
back at Pat Beverley saying shouts to Bud and thanks for hooking me up with that condo. So Coach Bud continuing to make an impact in Milwaukee, even now, not as the coach of the Bucks. Also, the biggest story of the game yesterday, with the score what it was, I'm assuming you were following along, Camille, but the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City were in Milwaukee filming part of one of their episodes. Apparently, they were in a suite. They were on the court after the game. I am not a Housewives viewer. I take it by your reaction, you are not either.
No.
But everybody I heard from told me this was a massive deal.
Yeah, my mom is a huge housewife, like all the cities. Like she can rank them all for you. She knows all the tea with all the different cities. I sent her the picture I saw on Twitter and I was like, hey,
Yeah.
look at the game. And she was like, oh my God. Like how, why? I need the details. And I was like, okay, like I'm sure we're going to see it on TV in a few months as to why they chose to come to this particular game. But it seemed like everybody enjoyed having the celebrities in the house, even though, that's not my cup of tea. I'm more of a 90-day fiance, 60 days in type of reality TV show type of gal. But hey, I love seeing people come and enjoy some Bucks basketball.
I did. In the interest of fairness and honesty, back in the day, I did used to watch The Real Housewives of Orange County, just to date myself there in its infancy, but I have not kept up with it. And that was the only city that I followed. I just saw it start to take off, and our friend Gabe Stoltz was the first to point it out and posted the picture of, hey, the Housewives of Salt Lake City are here. And immediately everybody that I saw I got messages from people too of, oh my God, did you see the Housewives? Are you near them? Like,
yeah, Atlanta was the only one that I tapped into at some point. Nene was too funny.
All right. So not so funny is, look who's laughing now. National media is starting to come around on the Milwaukee Bucks. Kevin O'Connor, who has taken quite a bit of arrows from Bucks fans and everybody else, the first to put out the piece, basically saying, you know what, we should probably start to pay attention to the Bucks because they look pretty good recently.
Yeah, love to see it. And it comes off of the heels. I'm a big fan of the Dunker Spot podcast as well. And of course, if you listen to Dunker Spot, you understand like they watch a lot of
Those
ball.
two, I should say, Kevin O'Connor, the first to do it in written form, but
Yeah.
Nikias and Steve, probably the first two to point out, you know what, I like where this is headed.
Yeah, they definitely highlighted the Bucks coming out of the All-Star break and things that they liked about the defense and what they've been seeing with the team. Even if you just follow them on Twitter as they tweet through games when they're watching the Bucks, they've pointed out some of the things that they've been seeing as
Steve
well.
Jones, especially, not to
Oh,
cut you off, but you follow him and you'll see it as the game is
must
going
follow.
on. Here,
Must
this play
follow.
worked.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I love seeing it. Like I think that the Dunker Spot talking about it, seeing Kevin O'Connor starting writing about, like it's going to continue to snowball and pick up some steam. So if the Bucks continue to take care of business themselves, like it's something that is going to carry over and it's going to be great to hear. And I loved in Kevin's article, he highlighted what Chris Haynes reported about Doc Rivers sitting down with every Bucks player and being like, hey, this is what I want you to do. And this is out. Like this is no longer like made a joke earlier episode of like the Cosby Show where Claire Huxtable was like, oh, you had big fun. You were having big fun before. Like that's done. Like I'm not letting you do whatever you want. Like this is what's going to happen. And you have to have order. Like without order, it just gets a little too messy. And that's part of what Doc has been instilling here in Milwaukee. We've talked about Bud coming in with the low-hanging fruit and just establishing things. And that's what Doc has been doing during his time as well here, where it's like we're establishing the ground rules and just the basics here. Here's the hierarchy. Here's the direction. Here's what you should be doing, what you should not be doing. Here's what we are going to do on defense. I don't want to see guards crashing here. Like this is everything. I'm laying it out. Here's the structure of how we're going to play basketball. And the players have seemed to really buy into that. And they clearly, like you need that type of structure. You need to have some type of understanding of what's going on the court, not only for your play, but like we mentioned earlier, like it helps with communication as well to know how things are supposed to be. Now you're able to really be connected on both sides of the ball.
I think that was the part that stood out the most to me as well. And I had heard some similar things. The players had alluded it too of Doc and his communication and how open he was. And what you mentioned before too, of as soon as Doc took over, he basically questioned the guys, how communicative do you think you are? And hearing one by one going down the line, here's your expectations. Here's your expectations. We've all dealt with different types of leadership and managers in our time, and you know what you respond to. We all respond to different styles, but the one thing that is the constant that all of us, I think, look for is expectations of, I don't want to be blindsided by you wanted me to do this when I didn't know that. And that's been eliminated by Doc Rivers. But the communication aspect, the other thing that struck me, and this wasn't in the piece, but this goes back to something Doc was saying at one of the recent games. We've heard him mention a lot about communicating with these guys. That was in there in the story quite a bit too, but specifically Giannis and Dame, and asking that duo what they like and where do you want the ball and what should we do here. And he had mentioned, initially both of those guys said, yeah, sure, whatever. I don't care if you want to do that, we can make it work. And Doc Rivers kind of said, no, I'm asking you, what do you want? Because that's what we're going to do. So help me understand so I can tailor it to that. And we can get you set up in the right spot where you're comfortable. And we've started to see a big piece of that now with Damian Lillard. And Doc talked about this a little bit before the game yesterday, just at a high level, but mentioning, our screens are a little bit different. And I think it was Eric Name that was the first to spot it and asked Doc about it. And he pointed out, yeah, we changed. We're going right to left now instead of vice versa. But, the reason for that was that conversation with Damian Lillard where he had to say, no, tell me how you want to get in the offense. And Dame said, okay, fine. I want Brook Lopez to set the screens on the right side and not where he was doing it at the nail. I want him further away from the basket. I want it on the right so I can go to my left where I'm more comfortable and I take my step backs from. And if he's setting the screen a little bit higher, it gives me more runway to get downhill. And we saw that play quite a bit against the Charlotte Hornets. So it's stuff like that, and again, this isn't an indictment on Adrian Griffin, but that's the type of stuff that this team was missing. And they were never going to get from Adrian Griffin or any first-time coach, that it was somebody like Doc Rivers that had been in that spot And the most important trait that Doc Rivers brings and skill that he has, and Steve Clifford talked about this before the game too, is, we mentioned his ability to be a leader and to manage egos and to coach stars. And Steve Clifford said the same thing of, I think he is going to be successful here because of that. Because Doc is a natural leader, he just has guys gravitate to him. It was, as a player, stars wanted to be around him. As a coach, he can connect with those stars. And even in coaching circles, as Clifford mentioned back in the bubble too, when they would have get-togethers, and they had, remember when players were talking about leaving and wanting, we don't want to do this anymore, we're going to leave. Doc Rivers was the guy they sought the advice of, and that's who spoke to everybody, coaches and players. And Steve Clifford said too, when we have our coaching conventions over the summer, guys will talk, and you'll look around the room, and half the coaches, if that, are paying attention and some aren't. When Doc speaks, and I don't mean this, I'm not saying this in hyperbole, when Doc gets up there and talks, everybody pays attention and listens. That's just what he brings to the table. And again, that's what this team, it seems like, one of the biggest things that they were missing.
Yeah. And you can't try to even equate like how important that is. Like, there's something that people have for you don't. Like, that's just leadership and the presence that you bring into the room when you walk into it. His resume helps with that, although some points, like, it's only one championship, but it's also 25 years of experience and respect that he has gotten. So like, it's going to carry over. And him being a head coach in Milwaukee, where they're playing at 5-7, he can point to the Raptors like, you see my number up there from Marquette as well. Like, so not only does he have the coaching chops, but he's also a former player. So he's been through the grind in a way that some other people might not have. Like Griff, of course, he was also a player, so that helps. But Doc having that player background, plus his innate leadership ability, plus his experience, plus just the way that he's going to be, like, his energy just comes off as being like, this is what you're going to get. I'm going to tell you exactly how I feel. And I know there are some Bucks fans who are like, hey, calm that down a little bit. It's a lot more media attention around this team than I'm used to. I'm not used to my head coach doing so many media spots, but like, that's Doc. Like, that's what you're going to get from him. And the team is responding well to it. So as long as they're responding to it, I'm here for it.
As we wrap here, Camille,
Scoreboard watching?
Literally just going final. I assume you were doing the same as well.
Yes, sir.
The Bucks thought they were getting some help last night. They only got a little bit, not all the help they were looking for, but they do get some more tonight, as the Chicago Bulls have just beat the Cleveland Cavaliers in double overtime. So the Bucks will be a game behind the Cavs in the loss column and a half game back in the standings. And it also, do you subscribe to this theory? It also eliminates the Cavs from the 40-20 club. So it's basically the Celtics, and we've already got two teams in the West that have hit it, and the Nuggets and Clippers can potentially get there as well.
Yeah, I'm very happy after that game winner last night with Max Strus from beyond half court. I was like, oh, it's gonna be a perfect evening, a big blowout. The Cavs lose, and I see that shot, and I'm like, oh man,
you got to be kidding me! Right?
Like, come on! But to see the Bulls knock them off in double overtime, I'm here for it. But again, we see Chicago on Friday ourselves, and we've played them a few times already this season. It's not an easy game. Like, Chicago is going to come, and they're going to play hard. So, got to get that win. But big shout out to Chicago tonight. I'll put all my Milwaukee, Chicago rivalry biases aside and shout out Chicago, because that's a solid for real.
Yeah, I'll buy a Craig Counsell jersey now after this.
I'm not go that far. You don't go that far.
But it helps on a number of fronts, because, not to get too sidetracked here, but we've talked about this quite a bit. You're one back in the loss column now, which is pretty vital, but also that's a divisional loss for the Cavaliers. So now you're just two back in the loss column in divisional games. Cavs have 3 divisional games left. You have that one left against the Bulls, which you have to win if you're the Bucks to put yourself in a spot to get that divisional tiebreaker. But the Bulls giving the Bucks a lot of help with that game. And tomorrow, or today, depending on when you listen to this, in Charlotte against the Hornets, more potential for some help, because the other teams that you've got to keep an eye on at this point, I think we can officially scoreboard watch, since we're in the last day of February. It's basically March at this
I
point.
agree.
But you have to Cleveland, sure. The Knicks, you got to keep an eye on to make sure that team stays at bay. You should be in a pretty good spot there. 3 games up in the loss column. You have the tiebreaker already, and you have one more game against them. So that's a lot to make up in just over 20 games. But you also got to keep an eye on the Miami Heat. And tomorrow, the Miami Heat play the Denver Nuggets, and the Knicks play the Golden State Warriors, 2 teams that have been playing very, very well of late. Again, it doesn't mean anything if you don't beat the Charlotte Hornets,
Right.
but this is one of those stretches where we talked about how difficult the schedule is for the Bucks. It's the same for those teams around you, at least right now. You have it more consistently than they do, but you got to take advantage of this help you're getting in this first week out of the All-Star break.
Yeah, and the Nuggets are playing tonight as well. So it's the first night of back-to-back for them, and then tomorrow they're going to be on the second night of back-to-back. So you're hoping, like, hey, it's a blowout looking like so far right now tonight for the Nuggets. So maybe they get some extra rest and they'll be ready to go tomorrow to continue to help out these Milwaukee Bucks. Like, beat the Heat. I appreciate that.
And then look, 2 much needed days off for the Bucks. And by the way, on one of those off days, the Knicks and Cavs play each other. So you're going to gain some ground on one of those teams or get some separation, however it is. But next week is when it kicks into overdrive with that schedule that we mentioned. We'll be back once again tomorrow with the post-game recap of the final game against the Charlotte Hornets. Bucks should have petitioned the league and said, I know we're playing some teams 5 times. Can we play the Hornets 5 times since we've beaten them by an average of 35 points in each of these games played so far? But the Bucks and the Hornets, well, the post-game recap from that one for you coming up tomorrow morning. Hopefully it's a Bucks team that continues to make some moves in the standings. For Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.